What if I told you that some of the most important truths in history were never meant to be known? Not because they were fake, but because they were just too dangerous to the people in power. Today, we're going to dive deep into the mechanics of how information is controlled, how history gets written, and how one journalist's absolutely explosive discovery was systematically buried.
So, let's just start with a question that gets right to the heart of it all. What if the very systems we trust to inform us are the same systems designed to keep certain stories hidden from view?
All right, let's get into a true story. And I mean, this is not fiction. Back in the mid-90s, an investigative journalist stumbled onto a connection so shocking it would shake the very foundations of the U.S. government, and, in the end, it would cost him everything.
Check this out. These are the opening lines from his 1996 series, Dark Alliance. He wrote, "For the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring sold tons of cocaine and funneled millions in drug profits to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency." Just let that sink in for a second.
The journalist's name was Gary Webb, and this guy was a Pulitzer Prize winner. This wasn't some random blogger. He had meticulously documented a direct link between the CIA-backed Contra Army fighting in Nicaragua and the crack cocaine epidemic that was absolutely devastating Los Angeles. His investigation showed that this network opened the very first major pipeline for cocaine from Colombian cartels straight into black neighborhoods. This wasn't just a story, it was an earthquake.
And at first, the reaction was huge. There was public outrage, there were protests, people were demanding answers, and Congress even started holding hearings. It really seemed like this massive scandal was about to break wide open. But that's not what happened. Instead of the story getting bigger, the storyteller himself became the target.
And that brings us right to the next piece of this puzzle, the powerful, coordinated machine that kicked into high gear, not to investigate Webb's unbelievable claims, but to discredit them, and to discredit him.
The scale of the pushback was just staggering. The Los Angeles Times, one of the most powerful newspapers in the country, assigned 17 of its reporters to the story. But here's the thing, their goal? It wasn't to follow Webb's leads about the CIA and cocaine. Nope, it was to investigate Gary Webb himself. 17 reporters to tear down one man's story. So how does something like this even happen? Well, there's a framework called the propaganda model that gives us a pretty good explanation. It points to 5 filters that news has to pass through before it ever gets to you. There's media ownership, who pays the bills. Advertising, who the real customers are. Sourcing, where the information comes from, usually powerful officials. The threat of flack, or major backlash, and creating a common enemy to rally against. Basically, these filters work together to make sure the news we get doesn't really rock the boat for powerful interests.
And the main weapon, the one they really aimed squarely at Gary Webb, was flack. Now, flack is just what it sounds like. Organized, negative responses. We're talking complaints, smear campaigns, official denunciations, all designed to discipline the media and make an example out of someone. Webb wasn't just criticized, he was buried under a coordinated avalanche of flack from the government and, sadly, from his own profession.
And you know, this wasn't some new tactic they invented just for him. Way back in 1975, a huge congressional investigation called the Church Committee found that over 50 journalists had secret ties to the CIA. Some people have called this cozy relationship Operation Mockingbird. And here's the real kicker. Declassified files later confirmed that the CIA specifically used its media contacts to go after and counter Webb's Dark Alliance story. It was all part of the playbook. But burying a dangerous truth isn't just about media spin. It's a tool of power that's as old as history itself. You could almost call it the science of silence. To really get our heads around this, we can look at the work of a historian named Michel Rolph Trio. He came up with this powerful concept he called silencing. And this isn't just about people forgetting things over time. He argued it's the active, the deliberate erasure of histories that just don't fit with the official story, the stories that powerful people tell about themselves. Here's a perfect example of how it works. In Haiti, there's a famous palace built by King Henry I called Sans Souci, which means carefree or without worry. What a lovely name, right? But what the official history silences, what it leaves out, is that Sans Souci was also the name of a rival revolutionary leader that the king had executed. So naming the palace after the man he killed wasn't carefree at all. It was a brutal, cold statement of power, a fact that was just wiped from the popular story. And that is how these clean, sanitized histories get built. It's not always about making a big lies. More often, it's about the subtle but decisive act of exclusion. It's about choosing what we remember, and, way more importantly, what we are encouraged to forget.
So let's bring it back to Gary Webb's story and see how this all played out for him. Because here's the thing. In the end, the truth did come out. But by then, it came out for a ghost.
Okay, just walk through this heartbreaking timeline with me. In '96, Dark Alliance drops, and it's a media firestorm. By 1997, after a solid year of relentless flack and getting absolutely no support from his own editors, Webb is forced to resign. Then, in 1998, the CIA quietly releases an internal report, and guess what it says? It actually corroborates the core findings of Webb's investigation. Then, fast forward 2004, with his career and his reputation completely destroyed, Gary Webb dies of an apparent suicide.
That's the devastating irony of it all. The proof that he was right came from the CIA itself, but it was buried in some dense report, released in the middle of a different political scandal, and the news cycle had long since moved on. The flack worked. The man was destroyed, and his vindication was effectively silenced.
So why does the story from the 90s matter so much today? Well, because the machinery of silence, that whole propaganda model, it didn't just go away. It's still here, and it raises a really critical question for all of us.
Think about it. The filters of media ownership and advertising, they're more concentrated and powerful now than they've ever been. The internet, which we once thought would be this great democratizing force, has its own powerful filters, its own algorithms. So the question is still right there on the table. How is information being filtered for you today?
This is the question we all have to start asking. The next time you see a huge, controversial story flare up and then just vanish, or you see the reporter suddenly become the story instead of the report itself, just ask, who benefits if this story just goes away?
Now look, the point of all this isn't to become a cynic who believes nothing. It's to become a critical thinker who's willing to question everything. That's where the real power is.
Because in the end, even when stories are buried and histories are silenced, the truth doesn't just evaporate. It leaves behind traces. It waits in the archives, in the footnotes, in those old declassified reports. It waits to be found.